as we're going to be talking about the coronavirus again. But we got a couple of things we want to do. We're going to talk about the virus and also the psychological effects upon people with social distancing. Tonight, I have two guests that are with me. First, I have with me tonight Dr. Brandy Peoples. She's a licensed psychologist as well as an ordained minister as well. She's on staff at the St. Louis County Family Courts, where she specializes in forensic psychology. She earned her PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and she is most proud of being a servant leader who is committed to teaching about mental health and preaching the gospel of the kingdom of God. She serves the ministerial staff team at the Greater Calvary Church. So let's welcome none other than Dr. People tonight. Also, we have with us someone who we are very well acquainted with, who is doing a lot of work in North County, Mr. Rick Stevens. He is president at Christian Hospital and Northwest Healthcare in St. Louis, North County. As president of Christian Hospital, Rick is responsible for positioning Christian Hospital as a provider of quality critical health care services in North County. He provides strategic leadership and overall daily operation of the 220 staff bed hospitals. Mr. Stevens also serves as the chairman of the board of directors for the North County Inc., a regional development association. Mr. Stevens holds a master's degrees in public health from Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee, and a bachelor's degree from Tennessee State University. Let's welcome everybody, Mr. Rick Stevens. And I want to thank you both for joining us tonight as we're going to be talking about something that is very dear to all of our hearts, and that is dealing with the coronavirus. And I want to commend the work that I know personally is going on at Christian Hospital Northeast. So I commend you, Rick, on what your staff is doing. Tonight, what we want to do is to, as I am learning some new wonderful things here we go. I like to just first, Rick, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Just explain to everybody again, what is COVID-19?
Well, COVID-19, as I understand it, is a respiratory disease, and it affects your lungs. And so it's a respiratory virus, and it's part of the corona family, the COVID family, I'm sorry. And there are different variations of it. And so this is a new form that we've not seen before. And so with this new form we've not seen before, it's caused so much havoc as we know it today.
Okay, very good. Now, a question that we have that is it true or false that the COVID-19 has mutated since we become aware of it? And if it has mutated, what does that mean?
There have been some studies out there, and there's a lot of things that are being studied that it's mutated, so it's taken on a different form. And so it's taken on a different form. As you know, we're trying to find a vaccine for it. Mm-hmm. But if we have a vaccine for one version of it, then it's kind of like the flu virus. If you notice that the flu, we get different strains of the flu. And so if it's mutated, then it's a different strain, and then we have to start all over. It's almost like we're going to have to be vaccinated every year for this coronavirus that's out there.
Okay, very good. And so now, there was a report on the news about a week or so ago that a lion in the New York Zoo contracted COVID-19 from his trainer. So since animals received it from a human, can humans contract COVID-19 from an animal?
From what I've read, and that's how they thought this got started in China, is that it came from an animal to a human. And so There is that possibility from
Okay.
what I understand. I'm not a clinical doctor, but from what I understand, I'm not a researcher, but from what I understand, it can come from animals that way.
Okay. Now, you have been working very, very hard of motivating people to protect themselves. What are the best possible methods to protect yourself against COVID-19?
It's old-fashioned. It's like your grandmother told you and your mother told you, wash your hands. And so
Okay.
we've been telling individuals to wash your hands specifically for 20 seconds. And there's even been all kind of videos out of how to wash your hands now. And then also, if you have a fever, that is something that is an indicator that possibly you have maybe this virus. And then also, if you have a bad cough, several indications in the research that's out there, people have had a cough for a while. And so that's an indicator as well. And then a tightening in your chest as well. And then difficulty breathing, because for those who are asthmatic or have COPD, this virus does not do well for you. So you really have to pay attention to your body and to yourself if you're asthmatic or if you have COPD. But you have to wash your hands. Don't touch your face. Don't touch your nose. Don't touch your mouth. Don't touch your eyes. Because the vehicle for the disease is to come in through it's a respiratory disease, so it can come in through your mouth, through your eyes, through your nose, and get into your lungs. And so we don't want that to happen. But the big thing is to wash your hands. And then also, if you sneeze or if you cough, cover your sneeze and your cough, and cough into your elbow, sneeze into your elbow as well.
That's great. That's great. So the first approach would be, number one, wash your hands.
Wash your hands. It's
If you touch
old-fashioned.
doorposts or doorknobs, whatever, cleanse them before you touch your face.
And wash your hands. And then we've even gone to where we're wiping everything down these days as well. So it doesn't hurt to wipe things down as well in this era that we're in right now.
That's fantastic. Good. Thank you. We're wearing masks, and I'm not trying to rob anybody tonight. Why is it important now to wear masks and gloves when we're out mingling around? Because at one time, I believe that the CDC didn't think it was necessary, but they came back and said we should do so. Could you explain that to us, please?
Well, the big thing from what I understand from the CD is to wear masks because it's a respiratory virus. And so if one coughs or one sneezes, the mask can hold some of that in. And so the surgical mask is better than the cloth mask, but there is some protection. And if you notice, the CDC has given guidance that you should go out and you should wear a mask. And that's to protect yourself and the person that's out there as well. Mm-hmm. And so what you're trying to do is make sure that you don't continue to spread that disease. And one of the other things that the guidance has come out is to be 6 feet apart. And I think we're pretty much 6 feet apart tonight, because if you've ever seen on a monitor when someone coughs or they sneeze, the droplets come out. And they say the droplets go so far. And that's why we want to be distance apart. So if you have a mask on as well, that protects you and that protects that other person if you cough or you sneeze, or if you're just talking as well. And there was that indication that story that came out last week about that church in Seattle or in the Washington area. 60 church members were singing, and they say when you sing, you're coming from the inside, and so you're belching out. And so you're putting a lot of things out there. So someone possibly was sick in that group, and with them singing, those droplets got into the air. So a mask probably would have helped in that situation as well from that standpoint. So we're trying to protect individuals with the mask.
Okay. So the mask will help you to protect the other people around you as well as protect yourself.
Absolutely. So if someone doesn't have a mask on, and then you have this covering here to give you some protection as well. It may not be 100%, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, besides washing our hands and using the mask, which you've already have alluded to about social distancing, from what I'm hearing, it's working. Could you expound upon that?
Well, absolutely. It's working because we're not giving the disease to one another. And so as we've stated and we've heard from the CDC, the 6 feet has been the rule, that if someone coughs or sneezes, that it'll drop, and so you'll be far enough away, and so you won't get those droplets on you. And so it is working by people isolating themselves, being at home, because you take out, it's like a match, those wooden matches, and so if you light one, it lights up the whole ring, if you can imagine that. But if you take one of the matches out, it stops the fire from going around. And so what we're doing is stopping the virus by not being around each other.
Okay.
And we've heard several things out there, the Mardi Gras or large events where individuals have come away sick. Well, you have a whole bunch of matches.
Right.
If you go back to my illustration, all in the room and everybody's on fire. But if you take people out of that situation, separate people out, keep them at home, then therefore you don't keep the fire going. So you stop the fire. So we're stopping the virus.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Peoples, again, we welcome you. And I want to ask you just a few questions because now we're going to deal with the aspect of the psychological effect. People are emotional beings, and people respond to their environments in a lot of different ways, from a lot of different thought process. Dr. Peoples, I'd like to ask you because social distancing is something a little bit different. If you like, all of us right now, we all like to shake hands and give hugs, but right now that's a no-no. So I'd like to ask you that we've been told to socially distance ourselves at least 6 feet apart, to quarantine ourselves in our homes, and if a person tests positive for COVID-19, to isolate themselves. Can this impact us negatively emotionally?
Absolutely, absolutely. That is a wonderful question. As you said before, we are social creatures. You know, going back on my ministry background, it is not good for a man to be alone. So social distancing and isolation does not come natural to us, but it is needed for such a time as this. So the impact can be emotional. The impact can also be psychological. There are spikes in anxiety, spikes in depression, spikes in stress. There's frustrated parents who can no longer hold their children. There are reports of single individuals who live alone in cities, and they may not have the family or the friend support. So in those instances, yes, social isolation does have a profound impact on our psychological functioning.
Yeah, let me ask you this question. So anxiety, stress, depression, could you give a brief definition? If someone's trying to figure out, I don't feel so great today, is this anxiety, is this stress or depression or something else? Could you explain those for us, please?
Absolutely, absolutely. What I tend to tell people is when you're thinking about any mental health issue, think about the word impairment, right? Because we're living in a chaotic time. Everyone should feel some level of sadness, some level of stress. However, it becomes an issue when it impacts your functioning, when it impairs your functioning. So a little bit of sadness, it's not so much to worry about. But when you're so upset, you can't brush your teeth. When you're so anxious, you can't function on a day-to-day basis. That is the difference between someone responding normally versus someone who is impaired.
Okay. So therefore, if prior to this event, I was moving pretty much on time, got up okay, and I moved here, I did that, but now I find myself not wanting to get out of bed and don't want to take a shower, and you know, I may have to call and cancel my appointments to stop doing things. Is that therefore, that would be called signs of a person showing they're depressed?
Absolutely. Those are some of the warning signs. So we're looking at things, like you said before, lack of motivation, that's anhedonia, not wanting to keep up with your hygiene, maybe isolating from friends and family, not answering the phone, just not feeling like you want to get out of the bed. Certain symptoms need to go on for at least 2 weeks before a person is diagnosed with a major depressive episode.
Okay. Question. People that do not have family or friends or no one living with them, what should they do to be emotionally healthy during this time of separation?
This is a really interesting time, and as I thought about that question, for those that aren't living with family or friends, you do have resources. You know, we live in the day and age of technology, I could talk to someone across the country if I pull out my FaceTime or Facebook. So for single individuals, elderly individuals, people who've moved to cities for school and jobs and they don't have anyone to rely upon, definitely call your friends, text your friends, FaceTime, instant message. That's a way to help stay connected. And for those that are outside of this technology age, hey, go back to writing letters and sending cards. You know, go back to making phone calls. I think we've forgotten that well before, these were ways that we stayed connected. So I think it's imperative for those individuals who are living by themselves to consider all those different resources.
That's very good. So as back in the day, when we would make a phone call to somebody versus texting them, pick up the phone and talk to them.
Yeah.
All right. Now, Dr. Peoples, living quarantine in your residence for 14 to 21 days, what can you do to keep from becoming bored and feeling lonely?
What a good question. You know, some people actually were very bored before the quarantine.
True.
So I think that this quarantine has really forced you to consider not just what you can do outside, but what can you do inside? You know, quarantine, it depends on your perspective, right? So if you think of this as a negative, it will be negative. However, if you flip it and you say, you know what, I'm not able to go outside, but yet I can stay indoors, I can read, I can watch TV, that activity that I've been putting off because I didn't have the time, it's time to pick that up. It's time to do crafts. It's time to cook meals with your family. You know, those are some of the activities that are positive that once upon a time brought us together that we've abandoned. And I believe now is the time to maybe pick up some of those old things.
Would you recommend a person who's living by themselves start making a daily schedule that when they should get up, what they would do that day? I'm gonna clean the basement out, or else I'm gonna start painting. Actually buy some watercolors and do something relaxing. So would you recommend, if you organize your day and have some time in there to make phone calls to friends, would be helpful?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a structured person. So my answer is going to be adhere to some structure. You know, this should not be a time where you wake up at noon and you sleep the day away. You know, if you were waking up at 7 or 8 for work, do that. But maybe this time around, go for a walk. If you were getting ready and you had your activities and your things planned, continue with that schedule. Sticking to a schedule also helps us to maintain our mental health. You know, so things won't necessarily seem so different when we've stuck to that same schedule. And when this passes, and this too shall pass, it'll be easier for you to transition into your day-to-day activities since you've been keeping that same schedule. So absolutely, do those things. Renovate the basement. Learn that new meal that you wanted to cook. Spend time with your children in the home. These are all positive activities that we could use to cope with and to better our mental health.
I got one more question for you. For instance, you're at home, and everybody's not quite as physical in thought as they should be. Don't look this way. That's a joke. But would you recommend, therefore, that to practice some type of exercise, something as simple as even doing if you have a hula hoop or something, just to keep you going?
Exercise absolutely decreases stress, reduces depression, and helps you with anxiety. So exercise can be anything, and they have all types of things on the internet, so you can do it virtually. You can go for a walk, as I said before. You can even do chair exercises. You know, I was just gifted a jump rope that I plan on using. These are all things to keep our minds healthy, but also our bodies healthy. And once again, I'll throw this piece in there, our spirits. You know, this is a time where people really feel down in their spirits. And exercise and reading books and praying, meditation, talking to friends, that helps us with our holistic care.
Very good. Thank you. I also want to welcome tonight another special guest we have, Dr. Laurie Punch. And Dr. Punch, she's a general surgeon who serves in the BJC system at Barnes, the BJC systems at Barnes Central, and she's serving at Christian Hospital Northeast. She's a graduate from the University of Connecticut School of Medicine, and she has over 18 years of diverse experience. Through community engagement in St. Louis, Dr. Punch carries the mission of healing each day, bridging the gap between the resources inside healthcare and the voice of the people, which includes a campaign to bring the national Stop the Bleed. That's another show we need to have. Campaigning to members of the St. Louis community at risk for violence and serious injuries. Dr. Punch works diligently to serve medical professionals, patients, families, and communities in their shared journey toward healing. Let's welcome everybody, Dr. Punch. Now, Dr. Punch, we're very honored to have you here tonight to be part of our discussion. I got a question for you. Seemingly since March 15th, when the world seemed to have gone crazy, have we reached the apex for the virus yet from any studies, especially here in the St. Louis bi-state region? And if not, is there a projected date that is thought we may reach the apex of this virus?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Pleased to join you. Sorry for being late.
No problem.
Yeah, as far as where we are in the course of the virus, there were initially estimates that the St. Louis region and Missouri as a state would not reach its peak until literally the last state, in the entire country, and it was projected to be around May 15th. Where we are located, we're sort of in the center of the country, but in terms of the population, we're completely, exactly in the center of the country. And so it's not surprising that people thought Missouri would peak last. What's in fact happening, though, is it looks like that peak is going to come a little sooner, more like many predictions are saying in the next 7 to 10 days, even before the end of April. I really think that that's important because it means what we're doing literally today is trying to control how high that peak is. Because the people who are potentially getting infected right now are the ones who will be diagnosed a week from now, right? At the same time, we have to have caution about what the peak means and what it doesn't mean. It simply means that's when the most people got the virus at the same time. But the virus doesn't just go away after the peak. It's still here. And the human immune system does not have a way of fighting coronavirus, nor do we have a vaccine for it. And so while we will sort of get back to normal, that normal will be a new normal, life with coronavirus.
Okay, so Dr. Punch, a question I have too. Do you see the patients with COVID-19, is the rate of recovery improving, or is it still about the same, and how long it takes for a person to recover? I think we're focusing, and not to make light of this, 80% of the people that contracted will not have really bad symptoms. It's the people that immune systems are compromised, or those 65 years old and older, so forth. Those that you're seeing, that you're treating in the hospital, do you see recovery taking place sooner, or is it about the same as it's been since it's come out?
I definitely think that the medical systems in the region, in the country, and in the world are learning more about how to best support people if they have moderate to severe COVID. COVID is the disease you get if you have a coronavirus infection, right? And 80% of people, like you said, have mild COVID. 15% have moderate, and 5% have severe. That experience, I think people are trying to do their best to manage that disease, especially in that moderate range, so that maybe we can prevent it from moving on to severe. But the disease, I don't want to understate how severe the illness is that COVID is, I mean, what coronavirus causes. It's not just a viral pneumonia. It's a whole body sickness that creates dysfunction in literally every organ in your body when it's severe. And that, unfortunately, I don't see changing dramatically. That's why it's so important that we work on prevention.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Another interesting factor that arose, I guess, 2.5 weeks ago is finding out there is a disparity of African Americans contracting the COVID-19. Matter of fact, I saw you, I believe, last week on the news when you were talking about this. Could you expound upon that, please?
So I'll start, Bishop, with a question back to you. Do people ask that same question when 95% of the victims of homicide in the St. Louis region are black? We're not mystified there.
Right.
Why are we mystified now? It is a socially spread disease that takes advantage of vulnerabilities, that is easier for it to be contracted in populations which are segregated and have segregated components of both poverty and the lack of health access, inadequate healthy food access, and inadequate healthcare access. There is no mystery. The same diseases that we see in the black community that are experienced disparately are now showing up when it comes to coronavirus. To me, I actually think this is a moment in time for us to pause and learn about what health actually is. Health is not a choice. It's not a decision. It's not a character flaw or asset. It is a reality of where you live, work, learn, and play. And if you do not have a healthy access to those things, which supports the well-being of your body, it's not surprising that your health suffers. Coronavirus, just like a bullet, takes advantage of that situation, and that is the reason why it's disproportionately killing black folks in St. Louis. Not surprising. It disproportionately has taken the lives of Latinx people in New York City as well. So you see, it's nothing to do with race or culture or anything. It's just who in this region is experiencing lower health to begin with. The virus just absolutely, as you were saying earlier, sets that on fire.
You raise an interesting point of the fact about what really is health. Would you recommend that going forward, there's more teaching of to the community what health is, how to sustain it, in order to enjoy a long life with vigor?
I think this is a huge opportunity to pump up health class, 100%. But that's not all that it's going to take, right?
Okay.
It's going to require food access.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to require work-life balance that allows for families to sleep and eat well. It's going to require supports so that people don't have environmental toxin exposure, air quality. We know that COVID deaths are worse in areas with poorer air quality, so environmental health. In other words, it is a structural problem. There are lots of Legos that make up the pieces, and people's education is part of it, but it's really this entire dynamic that sums to our health that we have the opportunity now to think about in a brand new way.
Thank you. Well, let me ask you this question for those that are watching, because I had a very interesting case last week with somebody I know that if you're living in a house with a family member that's been tested positive for the virus, should you yourself volunteer quarantine? If yes, for how long? Should you be tested? And what criteria must people meet to be tested?
So, if you have COVID and you're in proximity to someone, they're breathing your air, they're touching things you touch, you're putting them at risk for the infection. And so the only way, if you are COVID positive, that you can be in a home with other people is to radically isolate yourself, okay? So I have healthcare friends and myself that even though we don't have the symptoms or the disease, we're choosing in our own houses to sleep in different areas, eat in different quarters, wear a mask all the time, be neurotic about hand hygiene, because we don't, even though we don't have it, we're in the areas where it is, and we don't want to potentially silently transfer it to our family. So yes, if someone's COVID positive, you have to take radical steps, and it might mean even living somewhere else for a little while. Again, you see the problem here. That's a luxury. It's not always that people have access to another place to stay. I'm sleeping in my basement and taking my meals in a corner, wearing a mask all the time and not letting my son squeeze my cheeks, which he asked to do today, and I told him no. So that's very, very important. The problem is you have as many as a 1 to 21 day lag in the time when you're exposed to the virus and when you finally present symptoms. Generally, it's around 7 to 14 days. So the answer to your question is how long? So the person with COVID needs to be symptom-free and then 7 days longer before they're cleared. And then if you have a moment of exposure, you need 14 days before you're cleared. So it's very, very important to do so that we don't inadvertently spread it, especially if we're living in intergenerational homes. My mother was involved in the care of my child, and I actually have just purposely, it's been a month, we just haven't seen her because I just can't risk my child being a silent vector and spreading it to her. It's been hard to not see grandma, but it's been an important thing to do to protect her.
Something that Dr. Punch said, and she said it earlier, so when we come out of this, whatever the new normal is going to be, especially in parts of this St. Louis region, but in North County, since I work in North County and know it pretty well, not all, but some live in a household where we can't separate.
Yeah.
Where as we come out of this in, say, June, July, August, September, and they say the second round is coming, correct me if I'm wrong, or even now, if you can't separate and you don't have that luxury, what is there to do? And you said we have to highlight some of these things now on housing and separation, and you're talking about the social determinants of health and healthcare disparities and all of those things. And so hopefully this can be a regional plan. This can be a plan that we not just talk about, but actually implement some things where people can possibly have this opportunity to physically separate, because that's going to be important going forward. I work on several boards, and there was this one particular case. There was a family of 10, and I was just thinking, this family of 10, if this were to come into this family, how could they physically possibly separate? And they were there just picking up lunch and things like that. But it's those kind of scenarios that are going to have to come out as we come out of this that are going to have to give a lot of thought to. Because if not, then we're going to be kind of back where we are now, especially, as you said, in a vulnerable community. And you said it doesn't play on race, but it plays on those who, the haves and the have-nots. And so the have-nots have not that opportunity to have that luxury to separate.
Right. Wow. Let me ask you a quick question, Rick. Let's go with the question that, what's the criteria for what a person should meet to be tested? And now, where can they go to be tested? If you all both will address that.
Well, I'll start, and then you can finish. At Christian, we set up our testing site on March 21st, and so 314-653-5000. You can call that number. You can go through a screening, and as we talked about before, if you're having a fever, if you're having coughing, shortness of breath, loss of taste and smell, call that number, and they will work with you to come and you can be screened there. I also know that some of the FQHCs in the city of St. Louis, North City, have set up some testing sites as well, and there are other testing sites out there as well.
When you talk about shortness of breath, could you define that, like, how bad should it be? Because some people just, as they get older, just have a little shortness of breath, but it's not to the degree, I think, that what we're talking about.
I've talked to somebody who's had it who didn't have to go to the hospital, and I've also read 2 patient accounts. These were all people under the age of 40, okay? They're like, I could not breathe. When I lay down at night, I was totally breathless. So it's not just when I walk up the steps too fast, I get a little winded, no. And also the description of the chest pain being a burning chest pain across your chest, the chest pain part of it being a particularly unusual symptom. You know, if I could just talk for 2 seconds about testing, it's tough because it's an area where the community has one expectation and hope and understanding, but the academic complex of medicine has a very different understanding. So when we think about something like COVID, the point of testing from an academic standpoint, right, Bishop, is to say, okay, you have it, so people have to stay away from you. We have to do social distancing to the extreme. I don't care if it's a family of 10, we've got to find some way to get dad out of the house because now he's going to make everybody else sick, okay? That's the point of testing, and it's so radical that you actually want to go back and trace all the contacts that dad's had for the last 5 days when he wasn't having symptoms, because you want to be sure all those people are tested as well. That kind of contact tracing and radical isolation helps flatten the curve and suppress the surge as the virus is coming on the scene. At some point in time, the virus gets to a point where it has wide community spread. This is the assumption that this will happen. The hope is that that's slow enough and long enough that it doesn't create this overflow of people that the hospital systems can't deal with. But at that point in time, the testing from an academic standpoint becomes less important because basically the virus is everywhere. You're not going to contact trace 40% of the population. It's just impossible, right? And so while you, as an individual, want to know if you have COVID, you need to know if someone in your house has it. You need to know if you can go back to work or not. There's not always that push to make sure that can happen. And I'm really worried about that, Rick. I'm really worried about it because it's going to create this sensation for people that, they ain't going to test me because they said they didn't have enough tests. Now they're just not doing it. I don't understand. It's because the purpose of the rapid early testing is for tracing and immediate quarantine. It's not necessarily to change what happens to you as an individual. And that's really hard. I think we need to be responsive as a healthcare system to the community, to the needs, and at least be honest about that, because there are a limited number of tests, but there are some new tests that are coming out that are faster and better, and hopefully Missouri and our healthcare systems will get them as they become available to deal with some of that tension. But I think some people feel like, man, I had all these reasons to get tested and they wouldn't test me. But there was both a constraint on how many tests were allowed, and there was also a limit to what the point of the test was. And basically, if you have symptoms, you should immediately quarantine yourself, absolutely have a mask on, and call the screening hotline that we just talked about so they can decide if you need to get tested. Again, those symptoms: fever, chest pain, shortness of breath, cough, the major symptoms, but fatigue, really bad sore throat, and loss of taste and smell. Those are other, and even abdominal pain and diarrhea can be a sign. So if you've been around somebody who has a cough or you know is COVID positive and you have any of those signs, you really need to call to get screened. But I just kind of want to say, family, hang with us because there is a constraint on how many people we can test, and the benefit of testing gets less and less and less as more and more people have it.
Okay. Got one more question. We learned something last week when Dr. Hall was here, and about some people are asymptomatic. They have the virus, have no symptoms known, and let's look at this from a place where they go home, their spouse, children, elderly relatives could be living in the home, but they're not showing any symptoms, but they've contracted it. How can people in that house protect themselves from one another?
That is really tough. I mean, I'm not going to act like that's a simple thing because you don't know if you don't know. That's why everyone has been so intense about people sticking to physical distancing and sheltering in place because that's necessary to avoid asymptomatic spread. But eventually, at one point in time, like I said, more and more people, the virus will be more and more present. I think what we can do is, as every individual has the opportunity to do two things, right? Which is wash their hands frequently. The overwhelming majority of people give coronavirus to themselves by touching their eyes, nose, or mouth with their hands after they've touched something. It's not by people sneezing and coughing on you, although there is transmission that way. The overwhelming majority is you touch something, then you touch your own self. So keeping your hands clean and avoiding touching your face is something everybody can do to keep themselves safer, period. I know in my home we've become much more neurotic about keeping things clean, and there's Lysol and bleach everywhere. A lot of homes were like that before. So if you were like that, you're ahead of the game. But I guess the last thing is, this is a time, if there ever was a time, to really take your health seriously. If you have the luxury of being able to eat more fruits and vegetables, get outside, take a walk, get some sunshine, limit your intake of toxins, and have your body moving a little bit every day, man, this is the time. Because I'm telling you, folks, the coronavirus is not going away. This is months and months to more than a year that we're talking about. There are some people saying 2 years of living with it before we have the immunity. So this is a great time to think about health for everyone.
And from what you just said, you led me into my next question. Is there a possible vaccine in sight? When do we think we could see this?
Yeah, so coronavirus is a little tricky because our bodies have a hard time making a strong immune response to it. So the NIH has already given a human being the serum needed to act and test a vaccine. So, they did that like in record time. Was it like 38 days or something? It was this unprecedented time. But you can't speed up that human being's immune system showing an antibody and immune response to the virus and keeping it. And people are worried that even if you've had the virus and you have an immune response, it's not strong enough to stop you from getting it again, because people we know in Asia have gotten it twice. And so I'm not saying that to be, scary, but I do know this virus is a little different. There are other viruses we don't have vaccines for. You all know what I'm talking about. There's lots of very serious and lots of very minor viruses. A cold sore is a virus, right? There's no way to stop it. Sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. Unfortunately, coronavirus might end up acting a lot more like that, in which case we'll truly have to rely heavily on healthcare systems to figure out how to help people stay healthy. And the public health aspect of this is likely to take a very, very, very front line. In other words, yes, we're worried about ICUs. Yes, we're worried about the surge. Yes, we're worried about testing. But if coronavirus becomes part of our day-to-day life, we're going to have a public health plan to live with it.
Thank you. Dr. Peoples, I want to ask you a question because I've been approached by some people that with loved ones, we've seen on the news where there are loved ones that have contracted the virus in nursing homes. And when you're an older person, you're in a nursing home, you find that your security blanket where you feel comfortable is your family. And you want them to come and see you, but now you cannot go and visit your loved ones. So what can you do to help your loved ones in a nursing home to, one, not feel abandoned? And how do you comfort your loved one that are in a nursing home when they can't see you? What would you say to that?
Absolutely. So my heart goes out to those in nursing homes because this is a complex situation. We already know that elderly people in nursing homes, they have higher rates of depression just because of the conditions that they're in. They may not have the contact with family or friends. So you add this virus on top of things, it can further complicate the matter. So for that individual, I would say it's important, imperative to use your resources. They have smartphones with video apps. If you can establish a relationship with the workers within the nursing facility, it's possible you could see your loved one through that mechanism. If your loved one can write letters, receive cards. You know, I've recently heard of people doing parades and driving by. So maybe your loved one can position themselves by the window to be able to see you. It was said earlier by Dr. Punchman that we're at a new normal. So this is a paradigm shift. And because the paradigm has shifted, we also have to shift with it. So that means, what can I do? And how can I operate given this new set of circumstances? Because my loved one is there and I don't want to abandon them. So those are just some ways in which you can reach out to him or her.
Thank you. Rick, I want to ask you this question because it's in line with what I'm asking Dr. Peoples regarding to nursing home, but the hospitals have restricted now how many people can come in and to visit a patient. And some people may not really understand why. Could you just please explain to people why there's a restriction on how many people can go in to see and what are the restrictions?
Well, it's it goes back to some of the questions you asked before. So why the social distancing? Why the separation? And so what we don't want is someone from the outside bringing the disease inside the hospital to a vulnerable population, to patients that are already sick, and then spreading it to healthcare workers as well. And so with many of my colleagues around the country, we've talked, and I don't think there's a hospital in this country that has not had this in place where there are no visitors coming into the hospital. Initially, when we started, we said one visitor. And so let me preface that, though, if you're under, I think it's 17, there is a person coming with somebody under 17 to a child. Or if you're having a baby, there is somebody there as well. But to the majority of the patients, they don't have those visitors. And to your question, it's difficult for individuals. They don't have that support that can be there with them as well. And so what we want to do is make sure we don't spread it to others, they don't spread it to other patients, and we don't spread it to the healthcare workers, because we need those healthcare workers to take care of, like Dr. Punch, to take care of those who are sick.
Very good, very good. Now, Dr. Peoples, I want to ask you this question. As a psychologist, the other thing we're facing in our society, those people that are dying. And it's been the tradition of man in this country to have a funeral service, big or small, but you want to give them the homegoing service. And that has been amended by the fact of 10 people maximum at a funeral home. And so some families are saying they're not getting the closure. They use the funeral as a closure. What would you recommend to help somebody to get closure in this time when we've changed the way how we do funeral services?
That's an interesting question. I have a bit of a story to share to add to that. So I've seen on the news and heard that the individuals are, during the wake, they are recording the service, recording the time spent with their loved one to share with others via Facebook or what other social media apps. Well, when I first saw that, I said, wow, that's a really good idea. But then I had to pause, and then I thought to myself, well, I'm watching this video of a person that I don't know. So there's a good and a bad side to technology. To be able to share those types of things with loved ones who can't be present, that's awesome. But when it's up for mass consumption, it becomes entertainment. So I would say be very, very careful. That it's a wonderful option if you're not able to visit your loved ones. But at the same time, something like that needs to be shared with family and friends only. So that's just one method that you can use to help get closure. If you're not able to video record, once again, going back to that word, new paradigm shift. Maybe we need to start thinking differently about what closure means to you. Closure may not mean going to the funeral a home or to participating in a homegoing service. Maybe closure is spending time at your home looking through family photos. Maybe closure is calling a relative over the phone. Maybe closure is writing a letter and pretending as if you're writing it to your loved one who's passed away to get those feelings off your chest. Those are just some things you can do to get closure. Maybe closure is prayer. So to say you're getting closure just by being at the funeral home, it's just one way. You may have to start thinking about things differently.
Very good. Now, I'm going to ask you another question. And doctor and gentlemen and ladies, don't get upset about this one, okay? Because I know this probably doesn't happen to everybody, but here we are with social distancing. We're quarantining ourselves in our home. What advice would you give a couple that already does not get along very well, who now find themselves at home working all day? What advice would you give them to realize, what can we do to improve this relationship? Because this new normal is not going away soon.
Quarantine, I think, it's about your matter of perception, right? And if you have a relationship that's currently on the rocks, you could use that time. You have to focus on you first, right? So do the you work. Don't use quarantine as a method to kind of force marital counseling on your significant other. Use that to think about you, insight, inspiration. Think about what's going on within you. And once you've kind of worked through some of those you issues, those I issues, then I think that's the time to come together with your spouse. Communication, reminiscing, sharing in joint activities that the two of you may enjoy. But once again, I definitely don't want people to think quarantine is the time to make your husband or wife sit down and let's talk about all those things that bug me, right? Because that can promote irritation. That can promote additional stress. Give your partner time. Give him or her their own time to be apart from you. Maybe they need to leave the house. Maybe they need to be in a different room. And when they're ready, then you come together to work on those issues.
Got one more question for you. Now you're home, you're working from home, and the wonderful children were away at school, but now they're home. What do you do when you're at home with your children now, all day, to help make your home a happy place?
A happy place, let's see. Well, once again, Bishop, I'll go back to that word, structure is key, right? School is structured, work is structured. So just because we're in quarantine, do we let go of those structure? No, we don't. We want to keep things as similar to what it would be if the child was in school. So, hey, maybe you wake up in the morning and you cook breakfast together. That's a fun activity. You take a break and then you let him or her participate in schoolwork. Maybe you read a book together. Maybe you write a play together. Maybe then at noon you guys go out for lunch. You can be creative as possible as a parent. PJ parties, movie night, trivia night. I know we are in a difficult situation, and really, when you think about it, this is a worldwide trauma, but taking that into effect, you don't have to be traumatized. You can shift and you can do more positive things to come out with a better outlook on the situation.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left, and I'm going to tell you, I've been very excited by listening to what everybody's saying. And I think you're really helping all of us very well. But I want to give you all 2 minutes apiece, just to give you a closing remarks, whatever you want to say, you say it. So, Dr. Peoples, we'll start with you. Then we'll go to Dr. Punch, and then to Mr. Stevens.
As I was saying before, that this is a difficult time, a time that I've never seen, nor has anyone else seen before. But at the same time, I do believe that you can come out of this better. I know at the beginning of the year, everyone was saying 2020 is the year for clear vision, right? You can still have clear vision. Quarantine, isolation can be a time for insight, can be a time for revelation, could be a time to birth new ideas within you, can be a time to spend time with your family. We live in such a busy world that you don't realize how busy you are until your children grow up, or until you're disconnected from your spouse. So this time in quarantine, you could use it to focus on your mental health. Use it to foster relationships with your family, friends, children, and things of that nature. And as Dr. Punch had said before, this is a microscope on the disparities within the African American, other minority communities, but also helping us to see how important our mental health is to our physical condition as well.
Thank you so much. Dr. Punch.
I guess I would say there are two questions I would ask everyone to ask themselves, which is, what are you doing to protect yourself for the sake of others? And what are you doing for others to protect them for the sake of you? In other words, we are interconnected in a way that we can't imagine. The folks in St. Louis who don't have homes and houses to live in tonight, their fate is going to impact our region's experience of COVID. Your choice to keep your body clean and work and sleep and do all the things you can to contribute, if you're so privileged to do so, is going to impact the people around you. In other words, we have an opportunity right now to serve each other by taking care of ourselves with hygiene, distancing, personal protective gear, and so forth. But we also have the chance to reach out to others less fortunate, because how the most vulnerable among us do during this crisis is going to determine our shared fate.
Thank you, Doctor. Mr. Stevens.
I'd just like to say I want to thank everybody that I'm up here with tonight, but I want to thank those at Christian Hospital, the Dr. Punches of the world, the food service.
The nurses and respiratory therapists, get it right.
Absolutely. That's where I was going. The food service workers, housekeepers, respiratory therapists, nurses.
Yes.
The 2,000 employees that work at Christian Hospital, but then all the healthcare workers that work in the region that are tackling this problem. Because at Christian and everywhere else, people are showing up every day. And they're showing up with their uniforms, they're showing up with their masks, but they're ready to serve. And so they're not running away from a problem. When you're up against a problem, meet it squarely face to face. Running from it will not save you. And so they're coming in to do this every day. So I want to thank them for this. But then also, a lot of us get in to do what we do because we like to problem solve. And I like to problem solve. And in healthcare, there are a lot of problems. And, you know, we thought we were solving one problem, as we've talked about, and here comes another one. And this is a big one that we have to move on and solve. And as Dr. Punch has said, there are some things that we have to work on. And we've been exposed, and we knew some things along the way, but this has really exposed us. And so how do we problem solve? And so that's where we're going to have to go next. And we've shown that as a region, the healthcare systems can get together and try to work on this. And so how do we get together as a region after the first wave is over with and continue to provide services and work on this together? And how can we work on the testing? How can we work on the housing, the transportation, the food insecurity? North County is in a food desert. How do we bring that up? And I know there was several of us that have been working on that. And so that's the problem solving that we're going to have to go to next. And so excited to be here for that.
I thank you very, very much. I want to thank our guests again, Dr. People, Dr. Punch, Mr. Rick Stevens. They gave us all information tonight that should, one, encourage you that there is hope, but two, let us all be socially responsible for one another. Am I my brother's keeper? The answer to that is yes. Let us therefore make sure we treat our brothers with the same respect we want to. Wear a mask when you're supposed to. Keep your hands washed. Keep the social distance. And don't think that you're invincible and cannot get it. Now, I'm not speaking, as some people may think, well, you're a pastor. You don't sound like you're a man of faith. Very much a man of faith. But to understand this, I understand that we must be wise in what we do. So what I want to do before we conclude tonight, we're going to pray. I'm going to pray for everybody that's watching. I'm praying for your loved ones. I've heard so many people across the country that have told me about that their loved ones have contracted the coronavirus. So we're praying for their healing. There's a young man, I want to thank Mr. Stevens, because one of the young men from our church was in the ICU, been there, went on the vent, came out to go back, but now he even made a phone call to the church today, to his wife, to other friends. He's feeling better. So I want to thank you for the work at Christian Hospital Northeast and for all of the healthcare providers throughout this land. And I want to thank also, too, because of the different perspective we took tonight of dealing with Dr. Peoples, the psychology. How do we think, how do we deal with the matters at hand? My friends, we're in this together. We'll make it together, and we're going to rejoice together. Let's bow our heads and pray. Lord, I thank you now for our very fine guests that were here tonight to share with us very important information. And God, for those that are watching by live streaming or by Facebook Live, I pray for all of us, God, for all of our families, for all of our homes. I pray for our nation. I pray for our world. I pray, God, for this virus to be conquered, and that, God, we will have a greater appreciation for one another and for you. Bless, God, those that are sick to be touched and healed. Those that have passed away, comfort the family. Lord, bless the healthcare workers. And they're on the front line, God. Protect them, Lord. And Lord, we want to thank you for healing. As you even use doctors and nurses, I thank you for healing, God, that you will make a way possible. And Lord, I now pray, God, for every church that have yet, during this time frame, had to be closed. But yet we're still open because the people are sticking together. Bless now, God, each person, each individual. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. My friend, we love you to life. And if you need some information about where to get tested, if you go to our website, www.ggcstl, give us a note, how we can contact and we'll send information to you. God bless you. Love you to life. Don't forget Sunday at 8 a.m. and 10:30, live streaming from Greater Grace Church. God bless.